Welcome. This module will provide an overview of the core practices which are reinforced through the implementation of school-wide PBIS. This information was shared during new teacher orientation, but it is also beneficial as a refresher for all school staff. Our learning intentions involve three key areas. We will learn the definition of PBIS, as well as how this framework is used to support all students as well as staff in Virginia Beach City Public Schools. We'll also take time to reflect on the four core classroom practices, including their importance in promoting those safe, predictable, and positive learning environments. And then we will be intentional to think about how we integrate cultural responsiveness as well as trauma informed practices to support these safe environments. We know that the events over the past year have been extremely challenging for students, families, as well as staff. Now, even more than ever, it's important that students feel safe and supported in order for their social, emotional, and academic learning to be optimized. It's also important that we prioritize our own social emotional health and well being. Goal 2 in our Compass to 2025 strategic framework speaks to this priority. Our work is always anchored to our strategic framework, specifically that Goal 2 student well being. Our division acknowledges that student well-being and social emotional learning is that priority we have in developing equitable, inclusive, and supportive learning environments. PBIS specifically speaks to Goal 2 as it's defined as a data-informed decision-making framework as we work to establish the social culture as well as those behavioral and academic supports that are needed for a school to be an effective learning environment for all of our students. Every goal, as well, within the strategic framework has an embedded equity emphasis. Within Goal 2, we're focused on engaging in culturally responsive practices division wide, as well as identifying and addressing inequities within our discipline practices. Through PBIS, Virginia Beach City Public Schools has the desire as well to move toward equitable discipline and foster positive school climate. PBIS is an ideal framework for implementing strategies to support our students and staff, as well as preventing and addressing further challenges. This framework uses a tiered approach and focuses on the whole school environment to help the vast majority of students be successful, as well as providing a continuum of support for those who need more. This is a framework through which we can also provide social emotional support for students. Today, we'll be looking at Tier 1, as it is the foundation for behavior support that anchors all of our other systems. At least 80 to 85% of students should find success with these universal supports and practices. You'll see on the right the critical Tier 1 supports that form this foundation. Tier 2 describes what behavioral or social emotional supports are available to some groups of students who are not finding success with Tier 1 universal supports. About 10 to 15% of students participate in Tier 2 supports or interventions. Tier 3 describes what behavioral or social emotional supports are available to a few students who are not finding success with Tier 1 or Tier 2 supports. About 3 to 5% of students participate in these individualized supports. The 8 PBIS classroom practices you see listed here are what we use to provide that foundation within our learning environments to help reinforce and increase feelings of safety. These classroom practices are available, accessible on our PBIS Google site. You'll find the PBIS Google site icon on ClassLink listed here as you see on the slide. Today, we'll be focusing on the 4 classroom practices: expectations and agreements, procedures and routines, behavior-specific acknowledgement, as well as error correction. We'll start with defining that first classroom practices, defining those clear expectations. Take a moment to read the what and why, which outlines this practice. A dependable system of expectations and agreements provides the needed structure for students and staff. They help us to move from assumed norms and expectations for behavior to an agreed upon list of expectations that help to promote greater clarity and predictability. When developed in partnership with students, they can help to create a sense of belonging and ownership. Our class expectations should be a collaborative contract between the teacher and students. But why is student voice so important? We know that student achievement and engagement will increase when students have more ownership of their school community and their learning. The more your students feel that they are a part of the classroom community, the more likely they are to become connected to the course or the subject or even the school. This is specifically true when we begin to develop norms for the learning environment. After developing class expectations and agreements, we also want to refer to them throughout the school year, not only explicitly at the start of the year, but referring back to them as we acknowledge student behavior, as well as reviewing them again at strategic times throughout the school year. Here on the left, we'll see an example of how to utilize student voice in a particular situation. For example, what to do when I get upset. This can be a part of a school's overall school-wide matrix of expectations, or it can be a standalone, adapted to fit the needs of each classroom. They've anchored it to the school-wide expectations of be safe, be respectful, and be responsible, and further anchored it to self-management, one of the SEL competencies. By having it in matrix form anchored to those school-wide expectations, they're encouraging shared language, and self-management can be taught, modeled, practiced, as well as retaught by referring back to this particular document. Here also on the right, you'll see two examples of leveraging student voice in developing our expectations, both from a middle school science teacher on the top right, done virtually with her students, and then on the bottom right from a kindergarten elementary teacher done within a face-to-face environment. We also acknowledge that students have been in different environments with different expectations, especially during the past year and a half. As we view this practice, class expectations, from a trauma-informed and culturally responsive lens, we know it will be even more important this year to begin by defining clear expectations with student input. This helps to create a sense of shared community as well as ownership. Well-designed classroom expectations create that sense of consistency and predictability through those clearly stated rules. When we're all speaking the same language, students know what to expect from classroom to classroom. And when we're consistent with expectations from class to class, it also results in that predictable environment for students, helping them to regulate and operate in a state of calm. We can also ensure cultural responsiveness in the development of our class expectations by asking students what are their home and community expectations, and then look for opportunities to incorporate their own personal expectations and their values into the class expectations. It's important that we dialogue with students about some of these commonalities as well as differences in these expectations across school and home settings, and explain how expectations help to create an environment where we all feel safety as well as a sense of belonging. Take a moment to watch this Edutopia video, which demonstrates the process of developing shared norms. After viewing, we'll ask you to think about your response to this question. How do you see shared expectations and agreements benefiting you and your students in the first month of school?
Sense of belonging is one of the most important activators of a child's engagement in learning.
As human beings, one of the most essential needs we have is the need to belong. When that sense of belonging is there, children throw themselves into the learning environment. And when that sense of belonging is not there, children will alienate, they will marginalize, they will step back.
Norms are a way that we know whether we belong or not.
What does social studies today look like, feel like, and sound like when we're supporting the norms? To begin nearly every class, I start with the norms. We developed this list of about 10 adjectives.
Our norms are communicative, collaborative, zealous, and the most important ones, focused and serene.
This teacher engaged the class in establishing a set of norms. So by having children themselves create the norms, you are creating a pathway toward belonging for every single child in that class. And they have a role in this learning community that they had a share in building.
Come up with a statement. What does social studies look like? What does it feel like? And what does it sound like? And use those adjectives that we brainstormed together for our norms.
Social studies is collaborative. Everybody's kind of working together.
We get to choose norms we think will help us with our work and get it done.
This teacher created a common language with which to talk about our learning community.
Let's start at this table right here.
It looks and should feel focused. If we weren't focused, we wouldn't get any work done. If we weren't communicative, we might have someone struggling in the group. We can suggest to the group, you should be able to say it at a controlled tone.
Great. Thank you guys for reflecting on those norms, and we're gonna think about those as we continue our work today. The classes that go really well are the classes when I start off reflecting on the norms and using those norms to articulate how our class will run well.
Yeah. But sometimes it's good to take some of the norms outside.
All right, we want to do just a quick circle, set the norms for the game today for Capture the Flag. One of our norms is to be serene, but there might be a class where there's an activity that requires a lot of walking around, movement, even noise. And, on those days we recognize that today that's not going to be our norm.
You have to be inclusive. You have to include everyone, so it could make the game better, more fun, and you could have a better chance of winning.
Sweet, inclusive. It helps us own the behavior in the classroom. All right. Instead of a top-down list of rules that a teacher gives a class, these are words that we generated together. These are words that we believe in. Inclusive, focused, considerate. Zealous. Being zealous, great.
Next up is the core practice of procedures and routines. Take a moment to read the what and the why on the right. Procedures and routines create predictability and structure in the classroom. Students feel safe and ready to learn. They can help students adapt and be more sure of what to expect in the midst of so much that may be unpredictable in their own lives. Routines support feelings of staff safety as well. Posting procedures and routines on an anchor chart can help serve as a teaching and a reteaching tool. It provides students with a visual reminder of the expectations. Often, teachers will post these around the classroom in key areas. For instance, dismissal procedures by the door or device procedures by the charging cart. Be sure to align the procedures with the school-wide expectations. For example, respectful, responsible, and safe. Make sure they're positively stated, short and to the point, and presented in age-appropriate language. And be sure procedures are taught, modeled, practiced, and acknowledged. Here are some more examples of common classroom procedures. Sometimes they are listed all together as part of one document. Sometimes they are pulled apart and posted in the key locations within the classroom. You can see how each matrix is aligned to the overall expectations. Stated positively, there are just a few expectations listed, and they are worded in age-appropriate language. In the beginning, expectations need to be taught explicitly and reinforcement given daily. Also, reteach procedures during predictable, problematic times of the year, like before and after breaks, or when there's been a disruption to routine. Again, we see how student voice is so important. When they can give their feedback in the development of procedures, they have more ownership and engagement and feel like they're a part of their school community. Teacher feedback from last year spoke to the importance of having a daily check-in. It really helps build community and support social emotional learning. It can be helpful to have some days be less structured, but it's nice to have conversation starters on hand to help students get talking if they're struggling to get going. Here we see examples of questions on a variety of topics. For instance, would you rather questions, people of interest questions, special memory questions, and so forth. Teachers can ask students the questions one-on-one, in small groups, or with whole groups to get to know them better in a morning check-in routine. This can also be expanded out to have students ask one another the questions, either one-on-one, small group, using a structured format. When we think about the benefit of having tight procedures and routines, predictability and consistency contribute to safety and a supportive environment. We see the importance of teaching expectations and procedures explicitly, not assuming students know what we want them to know. We assume actually that they don't know what we want them to do, just like we do with academics. Teachers who have a procedure of posting the daily schedule and using that consistently help students know what to expect. Students feel safe when they know how their morning or day is going to go. If the schedule has to change, staff are transparent in explaining the change. Connecting the procedures to students' prior knowledge and home lives helps students understand and relate to the expectations. Teachers can use a variety of different attention or transition signals and even get student input on the types of signals used to be more culturally responsive. When students see that their input is valued, it increases their buy-in and engagement and helps build relationships. An important procedure to teach is how to agree to disagree in respectful ways, an important life skill that can't be overemphasized. The next two core practices involve behavior feedback. First up is acknowledgement. Take a moment to read the what and the why on the left. Behavior-specific acknowledgement provides increased opportunities for building positive relationships with students, and it increases the likelihood that the behavior will occur again. Outlined specifically on the left are the three critical components of behavior-specific acknowledgement. In this video, we'll see the difference between giving praise authentically and in a way that's reinforcing to the student, and giving praise sarcastically and in a way that's embarrassing to the student. It's important that we're sensitive to the way students prefer to be acknowledged, or else the acknowledgement fails to have the desired effect.
Behavior-specific praise, high school, example, and non-example. Daniel typically comes to Ms. Fisher's class unprepared and without the proper materials, so it's a nice surprise when he shows up today ready for class. In this example, Ms. Fisher uses behavior-specific praise to acknowledge that Daniel came to class prepared. Note how she states his name and then specifically describes his behavior.
All right, everyone, take out your rough drafts of your short stories. I'm going to come around and check them. Thank you. Oh, Daniel, you have your rough draft. Great job. Yeah.
To review, the teacher implemented behavior-specific praise correctly. She stated the student's name and delivered praise specific to the student's behavior. In addition, Ms. Fisher delivered the praise in an age-appropriate way, speaking to Daniel quietly and without attracting unwanted attention. In this non-example, Ms. Fisher attempts to offer behavior-specific praise, but her efforts fall short. Pay close attention to the ways in which her delivery and tone prove ineffective.
All right, everyone, please take out your rough drafts of your short stories. I'm going to come around and check. Oh, Daniel, good job. You did your rough draft. Yeah, I worked really hard on it. First assignment I think you've done in a while.
To review, Ms. Fisher attempted to provide behavior-specific praise. She used the student's name and said, "Good job, you did your rough draft." However, Her attempt was ineffective because her praise was followed by a sarcastic comment and delivered loud enough for other students to hear, potentially embarrassing the student.
So in the video, we saw that the teacher identified and described the behavior being recognized, and she delivered the acknowledgement right after she saw Daniel exhibit the desired behavior, which increases the likelihood that it will happen again in the future. An additional key factor is that behavior-specific acknowledgement is delivered frequently, 4 times as often as corrective statements. When it comes to developing the school-wide acknowledgement, we want to stress the importance of school teams examining student and staff needs. What will help make the process streamlined and user-friendly? What are some ways in which students prefer to be acknowledged? What about staff? Maybe instead of a Jeans Day ticket, staff may be more interested in a parking spot up front. Surveys are a great way to get stakeholder input. Schools are finding more and more creative ways to increase acknowledgement, and not just from teacher to student. We've seen student-to-student acknowledgements, as in video shout-outs. On the left are some examples of how a school used Flipgrid to encourage student-to-student acknowledgement. Students were encouraged to record a short video of themselves, briefly telling how they saw a peer being safe, respectful, responsible, or ready. The staff took the idea and ran with it. Staff members made their own short videos where they gave one another a shout out, or they shouted themselves out for something they felt was worthy of sharing for the good of the group. They kept the videos live and updated quarterly. On the right, we see examples of student-developed acknowledgement tickets. Tallwood and Salem High School leveraged the creative power of their student group, and in a unique way, students graphically designed their school's virtual acknowledgement tickets. Students received the virtual tickets through email. Our own PBIS coach, Evan Moss, created a webinar for you, and we can help you with that. So students received the virtual tickets through email. We can't forget families. They've expressed their appreciation to staff via email, phone call, or conversations. And many schools are choosing to list these family to staff shout-outs in staff newsletters. We know that behavior-specific acknowledgement, when delivered genuinely and in a way that is reinforcing to students, helps build student self-esteem and positive sense of self. For students who've been impacted by trauma, the recommended ratio of acknowledgement to error correction is even higher than the 4-to-1 ratio because of the predictability it creates. It's important that teachers are aware of their own vulnerable decision points. For instance, if I'm feeling tired or hungry, how does that influence how often or the way in which I'm acknowledging my students? It's also important to be aware of our cultural competencies. How much do I know about and understand my students' cultural backgrounds? How does that influence the ways in which I provide behavior-specific acknowledgement? Providing students with specific, timely feedback regarding their behavior encourages desired behaviors and goes a long way in establishing positive classroom climate. Finding out how students like to be acknowledged is very important. Some students don't want to be acknowledged publicly. For some, a private brief conversation is preferred over announcing something they did to the whole class. Hopefully you've had a teacher who made a positive difference in your life. For many of us, it's one of the main reasons we went into this profession. Take a moment to think about this educator and how they influenced you positively.
The last of the core practices, one with an undeniable impact, is error correction, another form of behavior feedback. Take a moment to review the what and why on the left. Error correction identifies an undesired behavior and is used as an opportunity to teach replacement behavior. Error correction is a part of the continuum of responses to inappropriate behavior. Effective responses to inappropriate behavior are calm and consistent and take place immediately after the behavior. They are specific in that they tell exactly what the student is doing and describe the replacement behavior. They are brief and respectful. As mentioned previously, error correction is a part of the behavior continuum. A continuum of responses may include reteaching, redirecting behavior, changing proximity, and one-on-one conferencing. What are classroom managed behaviors? What strategies can teachers use to be proactive and responsive to those behaviors? Each school should revisit their school's behavior flow chart at least annually. What behaviors are office managed? Are all staff, even new teachers, familiar with this? Do all staff know the process for getting help? This is why it's so important that school staff do share the behavior flow charts at least annually. When providing effective error correction, critical foundations include validating students. Ask them to share their experience and listen non-judgmentally. State the positive intent of students' behaviors when teaching situational appropriateness and hold high expectations for each student. Provide specific instruction regarding why certain student behaviors are necessary in certain school settings. Provide encouraging, skill-based, non-judgmental corrections when needed. All of these really get to the heart of building positive relationships with students and providing error corrections in a manner that teaches them. Behavioral error corrections can be viewed in the same way as academic error correction. We don't assume students all know how to display the expected behaviors all the time. So we teach, reteach, model, and acknowledge the desired behaviors with lots of opportunities for practice. I think back to the idea of seek to understand and how all behavior really is a form of communication. So instead of asking, why are you doing this? Let's ask, what happened and how can I help you? Some teachers use clip charts to publicly acknowledge and monitor student behavior. We have to mention here that clip charts can do more harm than good. The same holds true for publicly correcting a student in front of their peers, particularly for students with disabilities or those who have experienced trauma. It's also important that teachers are aware of their own vulnerable decision points, those situations that may serve as triggers. Perhaps we're tired or hungry, or it's that certain time of day. We must acknowledge our own cultural competencies as well, and that we may feel safe and empowered to seek support when necessary. By looking at behavior feedback through a trauma-informed lens, we can empower students by helping them to learn skills and strategies to self-regulate. We can reteach skills, which will help students replace their learned responses that may not be appropriate. By providing a continuum of responses, this will allow students help with regulating their own emotions and provide staff the opportunity to relate to the student's emotions before responding to them. The teacher must be self-aware about their own vulnerable decision points, cultural competencies, and feel empowered to ask for support when it's necessary. We want to ensure that we are culturally responsive when we give behavior feedback to our students, because building authentic relationships and shared trust must come first. Having high expectations as well as belief in our students will motivate them to learn appropriate responses. Remember that context and situation is also critical. Think back again to the idea of seeking to understand and how all behavior is a form of communication. Finally, feedback that we've received from teacher focus groups in our division echoed the desire for transparency, patience, and grace given for mistakes, the ability to be human, not just from teacher to student, but from administrator to teacher and teacher to teacher. This helps tremendously with authentic relationship building and creating safe and supporting learning environments for all. Here we have questions for reflection. What steps might you take to develop trusting relationships with your students this year? During which activities might you predict you will need to provide additional reinforcement or redirection? And some final questions for reflection. How do these ideas connect to what we already know? How does the learning extend your thinking further? And what questions do you still have? For more information, please reach out to your school administrator or your school's PBIS team.